The sun hung low over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the pine-scented trails of Yellowstone National Park. It was late summer, the kind of day where the air carried a crisp edge, hinting at the autumn chill to come. Ranger Jack Harlan had been patrolling these woods for over a decade, his boots worn smooth from miles of rugged terrain. At 42, with a weathered face etched by wind and worry, Jack knew the park's rhythms better than his own heartbeat. The way the elk bugled at dawn, the unpredictable moods of the rivers swollen from melting snow. He was a solitary figure out here, married to the job after a messy divorce years back, finding solace in the vastness that demanded nothing but vigilance. That morning, Jack started his shift at the trailhead near Old Faithful, his ranger truck rumbling to a stop on the gravel lot. He slung his pack over one shoulder, grabbed his radio and bear spray, and headed out on foot along the Firehole River path. The river rushed nearby, its waters a churning mix of glacial melt and recent rains, foaming white over rocks that could swallow a man whole. Tourists were scarce this far from the boardwalks, which suited Jack fine. He preferred the quiet stretches where the park revealed its raw side. No selfie sticks, just the whisper of aspen leaves and the distant cry of a hawk. As he rounded a bend in the trail, something caught his eye, a small dark shape stumbling through the underbrush. Jack froze, his hand instinctively hovering near the spray holstered at his belt. Bears weren't uncommon here, but this wasn't a full-grown grizzly or black bear foraging for berries. It was a cub, no more than 6 months old, its fur matted and muddy, eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. The little one paused, sniffing the air, then let out a plaintive whimper that echoed off the trees. Jack's heart tightened. A cub alone meant trouble. Mama Bear was either dead, relocated, or lost in the vast wilderness. Poachers? A vehicle strike? He scanned the surroundings, but there was no sign of the mother, no fresh tracks in the soft earth. The cub spotted him then, its head tilting as if weighing the stranger against the emptiness of the woods. Instead of bolting, it took a hesitant step forward, then another, its tiny paws patting softly on the pine needles. Jack held still, murmuring low reassurances under his breath. "Easy there, little guy. I'm not going to hurt you." He knew better than to approach. Wildlife protocol was clear. Observe, report, don't intervene unless absolutely necessary. But as the cub drew closer, weaving unsteadily through the ferns, Jack felt a pull he couldn't shake. This wasn't just any animal. It was vulnerable, orphaned in a world that didn't forgive weakness. Before the story goes deeper, make sure to subscribe for more narratives like this. The cub followed him for the first half-mile, keeping a tentative distance, its whimpers fading into determined huffs. Jack radioed base camp as he walked, his voice steady but laced with concern. "This is Harlan on the Firehole Loop. Spotted a lone bear cub, juvenile black bear, heading east. No sign of the sow. Requesting wildlife team for assessment." The response crackled back. They'd dispatch a vet tech within the hour, but the park's expanse meant delays. Jack pressed on, glancing back every few steps. The cub mirrored him, its small body trembling from exhaustion or cold. He couldn't tell which. By the time they reached the river's edge, where the trail narrowed to a rocky outcrop, the cub was only 10 feet behind, its eyes locked on Jack, like he was the only anchor in a storm. The Firehole River roared below, swollen from upstream thunderstorms, its current a relentless torrent that had claimed more than one hiker over the years. Jack needed to cross a shallow ford here to continue his patrol. A log bridge had washed out last season, leaving only slippery stones as a makeshift path. He paused, assessing the water's fury, the spray misting his face. The cub, undeterred, shuffled closer, drawn by some instinctual trust or sheer desperation. Jack's mind raced. If the little one tried to follow him across, it wouldn't make it. The rapids would sweep it under in seconds. He crouched low, speaking softly again. "You gotta stay put, kid. Help's coming." But the cub didn't understand, inching forward until it stood at the water's brink, paws dipping into the icy flow. Jack's radio buzzed with an update. Team en route. ETA 30 minutes, but that felt like an eternity. He weighed his options. Protocol screamed to back off, Let nature take its course. Bears were wild, resilient, yet this cub, with its ribs faintly visible under sodden fur, looked like it had been wandering for days, surviving on berries and sheer will. Jack had seen too many animals suffer needlessly in these mountains, their cries haunting his dreams. As the cub teetered on the edge, a gust of wind whipped up, carrying the scent of rain. Jack made a split-second decision, slinging his pack down and edging toward the water. He couldn't just watch. Grabbing a long branch from the bank, he extended it like a lifeline, hoping to guide the cub back. But the little bear, spooked by the roar, slipped on the wet rocks and tumbled in. The river grabbed it instantly, the current pulling its tiny form downstream in a whirl of foam and flailing limbs. Jack's breath caught. Time slowed as he plunged in after it, the shock of cold water hitting like a punch. His boots filled, the force tugging at his legs, but he pushed forward, eyes fixed on the bobbing dark head. The cub was fighting, paws scrabbling against the surface, but it was no match for the river's power. Jack lunged, his fingers brushing fur just as a submerged boulder loomed. He hooked an arm around the cub's scruff, hauling it against his chest and kicked toward the shallower bank. Rocks scraped his shins, pain shooting up his legs, but he held on, the weight of the soaked animal surprisingly heavy. With a final heave, he collapsed onto the gravel, gasping, the cub limp but breathing in his arms. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of their shared ragged breaths, the river's rage fading to a distant thunder. Jack wrapped the cub in his jacket, its body shivering against him. He wasn't a hero type, never had been, but in that instant, something shifted. This lost soul had chosen to follow him, and now, against every rule in the book, he was committed. Help would come, but until then, he cradled the cub close, whispering promises into the wind-swept pines. The mountains watched, indifferent, as man and beast forged an unlikely bond on the edge of survival. Jack lay there on the gravel bank for what felt like minutes, though his watch later showed only seconds had passed. The cub's shallow breaths warmed his chest through the damp fabric of his jacket, a fragile rhythm against the chaos of the river. Water dripped from his hair, pooling in the creases of his neck, and his legs throbbed where the rocks had bitten into them. He shifted carefully, propping himself on one elbow to survey the damage. A gash on his shin wept blood, mixing with the mud, but nothing broken. Adrenaline still coursed through him, sharpening his senses, the metallic tang of the water, the sharp pine resin from the nearby trees, the faint musky scent of the cub's wet fur. He radioed base camp again, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Harlan here. Retrieved the cub from the river. It's alive, but weak. Coordinates as follows." He rattled off the GPS location, his free hand gently stroking the cub's back to keep it calm. The response came quick this time. Wildlife team rerouted, ETA 20 minutes. They advised him to secure the animal and wait, no further intervention. Jack nodded to himself, though doubt gnawed at him. The sun was dipping lower, shadows lengthening across the canyon, and the air carried the promise of evening chill. Leaving the cub exposed here, even briefly, felt wrong. Predators roamed these parts. Coyotes, wolves, or worse, another bear drawn by the scent of vulnerability. The cub stirred, its eyelids fluttering open to reveal dark, glassy eyes. It let out a soft mewl, nuzzling closer, its tiny tongue flicking out to taste the salt on Jack's shirt. He chuckled despite himself, a low rumble in his throat. "You're a fighter, aren't you? Stubborn little thing." In his years on the job, he'd handled injured animals before. Eagles with broken wings, deer caught in fences, but this felt different. Personal. The cub wasn't thrashing or biting. It was clinging, as if Jack were the only solid thing in its tumbling world. He unwrapped the jacket just enough to check for injuries. The fur was slick but unbroken, no obvious wounds beyond the exhaustion. Malnourished, though, its sides hollow, paws calloused from who knew how many miles of wandering. 20 minutes stretched like hours. Jack built a makeshift shelter with branches and his pack, shielding them from the wind that whistled down the gorge. He shared a protein bar crumb with the cub, watching it sniff and nibble tentatively. Bears were omnivores, sure, but this one was too young for solid food. It mostly licked the moisture from his fingers. As the minutes ticked by, Jack's mind wandered to his own losses. The divorce had hit hard 5 years ago. Sarah couldn't handle the isolation, the endless shifts that left him smelling of earth and away for weeks. "You're married to those mountains?" she'd said, packing her bags in their Bozeman apartment. He'd thrown himself into the park after that, letting the trails fill the silence. Now, holding this orphaned creature, he felt an echo of that abandonment, a raw ache for something to protect. A distant rumble broke his reverie, the wildlife team's jeep crunching over the trail. 2 figures emerged, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the park's lead vet, and her assistant, a burly kid named Tom with a tranquilizer kit. Elena was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, her ponytail streaked with gray from years under the Montana sun. She'd patched up half the critters in Yellowstone, from bison calves to injured wolves. "Harlan, you idiot," she called out, half smiling as she approached. "Protocol says observe, not swim." Jack grinned sheepishly, easing the cub into view. "Couldn't let the river win. It's a black bear cub, female, maybe 20 pounds. Been following me since the trailhead." Elena knelt, gloved hands gentle as she examined the little one. The cub whimpered but didn't resist, its trust in Jack extending warily to the newcomers. Hypothermic, dehydrated, but no major trauma. Good call pulling her out. She administered a warming injection and fluids from a syringe, her movements efficient. Tom set up a portable crate, lining it with blankets. "We'll take her to the rehab center in Mammoth. Quarantine, assessment. If she's orphaned, we might release her with a surrogate sow or raise her for relocation." Jack nodded, but as they prepared to load the cub, she let out a distressed cry, paws scrabbling toward him. Elena paused. "She's imprinted on you already. That's not ideal. Makes rehab trickier. Bears need to stay wild." The words hung heavy. Jack had seen it before. Hand-reared animals that couldn't survive alone, ending up euthanized or in zoos. He scratched the cub's ear one last time, feeling her relax under his touch. "She followed me for miles before the river, like she knew I was safe." Elena sighed, exchanging a look with Tom. "We can monitor her overnight, see if she stabilizes, but you know the rules, no attachments." They bundled the cub into the crate, her whines fading as the jeep pulled away. Jack watched the dust settle, a hollow feeling settling in his gut. The patrol wasn't over. He still had miles to cover before dark. He bandaged his leg with the kit from his pack, the sting a reminder of the line he'd crossed. As twilight painted the sky in bruised purples, Jack resumed the trail, the river now a steady companion on his left. The woods felt emptier without the cub's soft footfalls behind him. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the path ahead, a steep climb toward the geyser basins, where steam vents hissed like hidden dragons. But every rustle in the brush made him glance back, half expecting those wide eyes to reappear. The park was full of surprises, he reminded himself. Lost things had a way of finding their way back. Deeper into the patrol, the trail forked toward a meadow dotted with wildflowers, their petals closing against the cooling air. Jack paused to log a fallen log blocking the path, his pen scratching against the notepad. That's when he heard it, a faint, echoing yip, not quite a bark, carried on the breeze. He froze, heart skipping. Scanning the tree line, he spotted her, the cub, somehow escaped or never fully contained, stumbling out from the undergrowth. Her fur was drier now, but she moved with purpose, straight toward him, as if the team's intervention had been a mere detour. Jack's radio crackled, Elena checking in. She settled in the crate, sedated. "You good?" He hesitated, thumb off the button. "Yeah, all clear." But as the cub closed the gap, nuzzling his boot with a contented huff, he knew the truth. This wasn't over. The miles stretched ahead, and so did their improbable journey. The mountains, vast and unforgiving, seemed to lean in, whispering of bonds that defied the rules. Jack trudged onward through the meadow, the grass whispering against his pant legs as the last light of day bled into dusk. The cub's presence at his heels was a secret weight, her small form weaving in and out of the tall stems like a shadow come to life. He hadn't meant to lie to Elena, not outright anyway, but the words had slipped out, a reflex born of too many years navigating the gray areas of park life. Rules were there for a reason, to keep humans and wildlife in their lanes, to prevent the kind of dependency that turned a wild animal into a pet. Yet here she was, padding along with a determination that tugged at something deep in his chest, a reminder of the loneliness he'd buried under layers of routine. He glanced down, her dark eyes catching the fading glow, reflecting it back like polished obsidian. "How'd you even get out of there, girl?" he muttered, keeping his voice low. The crate had been secure. Tom was meticulous about latches. Maybe she'd wriggled free during transport, or the sedation wore off quicker than expected. Bears were clever, especially the young ones fighting for survival. Jack scanned the horizon, the meadow giving way to a denser thicket of lodgepole pines that climbed toward the plateau. The trail here was less defined, more a game path worn by generations of animals, and he knew it led to a series of hot springs where the ground steamed and bubbled, a natural hazard for the unwary. The cub stayed close, her nose bumping his calf every few steps, as if afraid he'd vanish into the twilight. Jack's mind raced with options. He could radio Elena again, admit the truth, and have them circle back. But that would mean corralling the cub, stressing her further, and probably earning a stern lecture, or worse, a suspension for protocol violation. The Park Service didn't take kindly to rangers playing savior. It blurred lines that could lead to dangerous human-animal encounters down the line. No, better to guide her toward a safer spot, maybe near a known bear denning area where she could fend for herself once the team arrived properly. He pulled a granola bar from his pack, breaking off a piece and tossing it ahead. She pounced on it eagerly, her jaws working with surprising vigor, buying him a moment to think. As they crested the rise, the air grew warmer, laced with the sulfurous tang of geothermal activity. The trail skirted a boardwalk overlook, but Jack veered off, sticking to the unofficial path to avoid any late-season hikers. The cub followed without hesitation, her paws silent on the needle-strewn ground. He remembered a similar incident years back, a fox kit that had trailed a tour group for days, only to be trapped and relocated, never adjusting to the wild. The thought soured his stomach. This cub deserved better. She was a survivor, not some helpless stray. Jack's own life flashed in fragments, growing up in rural Wyoming where his dad taught him to respect the land's harsh lessons, or the empty house in Bozeman after Sarah left. The silence broken only by the crackle of his police scanner tuned to park frequencies. A low rumble echoed from the trees, a warning growl. Jack halted, hand on his bear spray, ears straining. Not a bear. Thunder rolling in from the west. Storm clouds had gathered while he'd been distracted, dark and heavy, promising a downpour that could turn the trails to mudslides. He quickened his pace, the cub trotting to keep up, her breaths coming in soft pants. The hot springs came into view, a series of turquoise pools ringed by crusty white deposits, steam rising like ghosts in the cooling air. The ground here was treacherous, thin crusts over boiling mud that could scald flesh in seconds. Jack steered wide, but the cub, curious and unheeding, veered toward the edge, her nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents. "Hey, no!" Jack lunged, scooping her up just as her paw broke through the brittle surface, a puff of scalding vapor hissing up. She squirmed in his arms, startled but unharmed, her claws pricking his jacket. He held her firm, heart pounding, the heat from the spring radiating against his legs like an open oven. "You gotta be smarter than that, kid. This place'll cook you alive." Setting her down gently, he blocked the path with his body, guiding her back to solid earth. The incident shook him. She was too trusting, too reliant on him already. Imprinting wasn't just a risk. It was happening, right there in the fading light. The first fat raindrops splattered down, turning the air thick and electric. Jack pulled his poncho from the pack, draping it over both of them as best he could, the cub huddling against his side. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the valley in stark white, followed by a boom that vibrated through the pines. He found a shallow overhang in the rock face, a natural shelter just off the trail, and they ducked in, the space barely wide enough for one, but he made it work, cradling her to shield from the wind-whipped rain. Water cascaded in sheets now, drumming on the leaves like 1,000 fingers, blurring the world beyond to a gray haze. In the dim confines, Jack's thoughts turned inward. Why her? Why now? The divorce had left scars, a quiet resentment toward attachments that could be lost to the wild unpredictability of life. But this cub, with her unwavering gaze, chipped at that armor. She wasn't demanding words or promises, just presence, a steady warmth against the storm. He stroked her fur, now damp again, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat sync with his own slowing pulse. The radio stayed silent. No signal in this pocket of the canyon, another delay courtesy of the mountains. Hours seemed to pass in the patter of rain, though it was less than one. The storm eased to a drizzle, and Jack emerged, the cub stirring with a yawn that revealed tiny milk teeth. They pressed on, the trail slick underfoot, every step a negotiation between duty and instinct. He spotted fresh tracks, elk maybe heading to lower ground, but no sign of other bears. The plateau leveled out toward a ridge overlooking the Firehole Loop, where the river twisted like a silver vein in the dark. Distant lights flickered from the park's lodges, a reminder of civilization just beyond the tree line. As they neared the ridge, Jack's radio finally buzzed to life, Elena's voice cutting through the static. "Harlan, status? We're prepping for overnight monitoring on that cub. You spot anything else out there?" He thumbed the button, the cub's head lifting at the sound. "Negative on sightings. Just finishing the loop. Storm slowed me down." Another half-truth, but it bought time. The ridge offered a vantage. Perhaps he could leave her here, in a berry patch rich with food, and slip away at dawn. But as she nuzzled his hand, her trust absolute, Jack felt the pull strengthen. The miles they'd covered together weren't just distance. They were a thread weaving through the isolation, pulling him toward a choice that could change everything. The night deepened, stars piercing the clearing sky like distant campfires. Jack built a small fire in a cleared ring, permitted for emergencies, its glow casting flickering shadows on the cub's face. She curled beside him, finally still, as if the journey's toll had caught up. He watched her sleep, the weight of the day settling like the dew on the grass. Tomorrow would bring decisions, conflicts with the team, maybe even repercussions. But for now, in the quiet vastness of Yellowstone, man and cub shared the watch, bound by the unspoken language of survival. The river's murmur rose faintly below, a constant undercurrent to their fragile alliance, hinting at crossings yet to come. Dawn broke over the ridge with a pale, hesitant light, filtering through the pines like smoke from a dying fire. Jack stirred from his shallow sleep, the embers of last night's blaze reduced to gray ash, their faint warmth long dissipated into the crisp mountain air. The cub was still nestled against him, her body a small, warm curve under his arm, rising and falling with the steady rhythm of slumber. He lay there for a moment, the weight of her trust pressing on him heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. The stars had wheeled overhead through the night, silent witnesses to their vigil, and now the world was awakening. The trill of a meadowlark, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, the distant gurgle of the Firehole River carving its endless path below. Jack eased away carefully, not wanting to rouse her yet. His muscles ached from the cold ground and the day's exertions, his bandaged shin a dull throb under the crusted mud. He stretched, joints popping, and scanned the ridge. The berry patch he'd eyed yesterday sprawled nearby, laden with service berries and chokecherries, their clusters heavy and dark against the green. It was a natural larder for a young bear, far from human trails but within the park's wild heart. If he could coax her there, fill her belly, maybe she'd take to foraging on her own. The thought twisted in his gut. Leaving her felt like abandonment, echoing the empty rooms back in Bozeman, but keeping her close invited disaster. For both of them. The cub's eyes fluttered open as he rummaged in his pack for breakfast. She blinked up at him, nose twitching at the scent of the jerky he unwrapped. "Morning, wanderer," Jack said softly, tearing off a small piece and offering it on his palm. She sniffed, then snatched it with a quick nip, her teeth grazing his skin without breaking it. Progress. She was eating more readily now, her energy returning in fits and starts. He portioned out what he could spare, mixing it with water from his canteen to soften it, watching her lap it up with growing enthusiasm. In the soft light, her fur gleamed with a healthier sheen. The mud from the river mostly flaked away, revealing the sleek black coat of a black bear cub, destined for the wilds. Radio static crackled as he tuned it low, Elena's voice emerging clear and urgent. Harlan, morning check-in. Cub's stable overnight. Vitals good, no signs of infection. We're running tests today for relocation options. You wrapping up that loop? Need you back at base for debrief. Jack's thumb hovered over the button, the cub pausing mid-chew to tilt her head at the noise. He depressed it briefly. Loop's clear, heading in soon. Any updates on her origin? It was a deflection, buying seconds while his mind spun excuses. Elena rattled off preliminaries. No collar from a known sow. Possible orphan from a poaching incident last season in the Lamar Valley. Jack listened half-heartedly, his eyes on the cub as she finished her meal and began nosing around the fire pit, pawing at the ash with innocent curiosity. Copy that, he replied, signing off before the questions deepened. The ridge trail descended toward the main path now, a 2-mile hike back to the trailhead where his truck waited. If he moved fast, he could stash her somewhere safe en route, circle back later under the guise of a follow-up patrol. But as he shouldered his pack, the cub rose and fell in step beside him, her gait steadier, tail a stubby flag of determination. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the air. Dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. They wove through the pines, the ground soft with fallen needles, the scent of damp earth rising with each step. Half a mile down, the trail widened into a service road scarred by tire ruts from maintenance vehicles. Jack heard the low hum of an engine before he saw it, a park utility truck bouncing along, its yellow beacon flashing lazily. He cursed under his breath, pulling the cub behind a cluster of boulders. Stay, he whispered, though he knew words were meaningless. It was the tone that mattered, calm and commanding. She hunkered down, ears perked as the truck slowed. It was Tom, Elena's assistant, leaning out the window with a wave. Morning, Ranger. Elena sent me to scout for any sign of that cub. Thought you might have crossed paths again. Tom's face was boyish under the brim of his hat, eyes scanning the brush with practiced ease. He killed the engine, hopping out with a clipboard in hand. Jack stepped into view, forcing a casual nod, heart hammering against his ribs. Nothing yet. She's probably holed up somewhere by now. I covered a lot of ground yesterday. Meadows, springs, the ridge. He kept his body angled, blocking the boulders, praying the cub stayed put. The air between them thickened with the unspoken. Tom was sharp, had seen Jack's attachment form in real time. Tom scratched his chin, glancing around. Yeah, Elena mentioned the imprinting. Tough break. We've got a surrogate sow in mind, relocated from Grand Teton last month. If we can get this one integrated. He trailed off, jotting notes. A rustle sounded from the rocks, too loud, a paw scraping stone. Jack's blood ran cold. You hear that? Tom asked, turning toward the sound. Just a squirrel, probably. Jack moved smoothly, clapping Tom on the shoulder to redirect him. Hey, while you're here, mind giving me a lift back? Save me some boot leather. Tom hesitated, then shrugged. Sure thing. Hop in. As they walked to the truck, Jack risked a glance back. The cub's head poked out, eyes wide and fixed on him, a soft whine escaping before she ducked away. Relief flooded him, mixed with guilt sharp as a thorn. She was hiding, but for how long? Would she follow the road, expose herself to traffic? The drive was tense, the cab filled with the rumble of the engine and small talk about park gossip. A bison jam on the east entrance, a new interpretive sign for the geysers. Jack nodded along, his mind miles away, replaying the cub's gaze. Tom dropped him at the trailhead, oblivious, speeding off toward base. Jack lingered by his truck, the lot empty save for a few early hikers stretching their legs. He couldn't just leave. The pull was magnetic, drawing him back up the trail like an unfinished sentence. Slinging his pack down, he grabbed a thermal blanket and a can of bear-safe formula from the emergency kit. Supplies meant for orphaned fawns or kits, but adaptable. One more check, he told himself, though he knew it was more. The sun beat down now, midday heat shimmering off the asphalt as he retraced his steps, calling softly into the woods. "Hey, girl, where'd you go?" The service road curved, and there she was, stumbling from the underbrush a quarter-mile up, fur dusted with dirt, but unharmed. She bounded toward him with a yip of recognition, circling his legs in joyful loops. Jack knelt, wrapping the blanket around her, the formula bottle at the ready. She suckled greedily, paws kneading his knee like a domestic kitten, her eyes closing in contentment. In that moment, protocol be damned, she needed him, and the wild could wait. But reality intruded with a crackle from his radio, Elena's voice, clipped and concerned. "Harlan, we've got a report from a hiker. Lone cub near the service road. You in the area?" Jack froze, bottle midway to her mouth, the weight of deception settling like lead. The miles between them had shrunk to nothing, but the chasm of rules yawned wider. He set the bottle down, the cub mewling in protest, and thumbed the radio. "On my way to check it out." As he gathered her up, heading toward a hidden thicket off the road, he wondered how long he could outrun the inevitable. The park's vastness offered cover, but secrets had a way of surfacing, like stones in a rushing stream. The river called from below, its voice a warning of crossings that tested everything. Jack's boots sank into the soft earth of the thicket as he ducked under the low-hanging branches of a spruce. The cub clutched against his chest like a secret too heavy to carry alone. The thermal blanket muffled her soft whines, but they pierced him all the same, a reminder of the fragile line he was towing. The service road lay just beyond, its gravel crunching faintly under distant tires. Hikers, maintenance crews, anyone who might spot them. He wove deeper, the air thick with the loamy scent of moss and decaying leaves. Sunlight dappled through the canopy like fractured gold. His heart hammered, not from the hike but from the lie blooming in his throat, the one he'd have to swallow when he faced Elena. He found a natural hollow beneath a fallen log, overgrown with ferns that formed a makeshift curtain. Gently, he set the cub down, her paws splaying on the cool dirt as she blinked up at him, confused but trusting. "Shh, just for a bit," Jack murmured, pouring more formula into the bottle. She latched on immediately, her suckling a rhythmic pull that steadied his nerves. The thicket was off the beaten path, a forgotten corner he'd mapped during winter patrols, teeming with insects and small game but shielded from view. He could leave her here with the blanket and some scattered berries, check back after his debrief. It wasn't ideal. Predators could sniff her out, or she'd wander again. But it beat exposure. The radio buzzed again, Elena's voice sharper now. "Harlan, that hiker report came from near your truck. Coordinates match the loop's end. You sure you're clear?" Jack's mouth went dry, the bottle trembling slightly in his grip. The cub finished and nuzzled his hand, her wet nose cold against his knuckles. He thumbed the button. Investigating now. Might be a false alarm. Could be a raccoon kit or something. It was flimsy, and he knew she heard it in his tone, the slight hitch that betrayed him. Elena paused, then, "Copy, but get eyes on it soon. We're short-staffed. And if it's our cub, we need to move fast before she imprints further." He signed off, clipping the radio to his belt with a curse under his breath. Imprinting. The word hung like smoke, choking him. He'd seen the signs building, the way she shadowed his every step, the lack of fear in her eyes when he approached. Black bears were adaptable, but a cub this young, separated from her mother, latched on to the first protector she found. Him. Jack ran a hand through his stubbled jaw, the rasp loud in the quiet. At 42, he'd patched up his share of regrets, from bar fights in his younger days to the slow unraveling of his marriage. Sarah had called him distant, a ghost haunting their home while his mind roamed the trails. Now, here he was, tethering himself to a wild thing that could never stay. The cub pawed at his boot, her small body leaning into his leg as if sensing his turmoil. Jack knelt, scratching behind her ears, feeling the velvet softness of her fur. "What am I doing, huh? You're not a dog, girl. Can't follow me home." But even as he said it, visions flickered, a quiet cabin on the park's edge. Her rooting through the yard while he grilled steaks on weekends off. Foolish. Dangerous. The Park Service had rules for a reason. Human scent on a bear meant rejection by its kind, or worse, aggression toward people. He stood, resolve hardening. Time to go. He scattered a handful of choke cherries nearby, their tart juice staining his fingers, and backed away slowly. Stay put, I'll be back. The cub watched, head cocked, then ambled toward the berries, nosing them with tentative curiosity. Jack slipped out of the thicket, heart twisting as her form vanished behind the foliage. The trail back to the road felt endless, each step echoing his isolation. By the time he reached his truck, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cooling breeze, the midday sun slanting through the pines like accusatory fingers. Base camp was a bustle of activity when he arrived, a cluster of low buildings near the Mammoth Hot Springs, where rangers swapped shifts and wildlife teams coordinated rescues. Jack parked and headed straight for the debrief room, a prefab with maps pinned to the walls and the faint smell of coffee grounds. Elena was there, poring over a laptop with Tom, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mix of relief and suspicion. "Jack, glad you're back in one piece. That storm yesterday. Nasty one." She gestured to a chair, but he remained standing, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah, kept me pinned down for a bit. No sign of the cub on the loop, though." Tracks were too muddled from the rain. Tom glanced up from his notes, eyebrows raised. The hiker said it was definitely a bear, small, black, trailing a guy in ranger gear. Jack's stomach knotted. He met Elena's gaze steadily. "Sounds like a mix-up. Plenty of folks out in green jackets. Probably saw a cub from afar and assumed." Elena studied him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The mud caked on his boots, the faint scratches from the thicket on his hands. She'd known him for years, since his first season fresh out of training, and could read the tells like weather patterns. "All right, but if she shows up again, you call it in immediately. No heroics. We can't afford another river stunt." He nodded, the weight of her words pressing down. "Understood." The debrief dragged on, reports on trail conditions, a coyote sighting near the lodges, but Jack's mind was elsewhere, ticking like a clock. By the time he escaped to the break room for a lukewarm coffee, the afternoon shadows were lengthening, the camp's fluorescent lights humming to life. He waited until the shift change buzzed with chatter, then slipped out to his truck. The drive back to the trailhead was a blur, the radio tuned low to avoid interruptions. Dusk painted the sky in deep indigos as he parked and grabbed his pack, the thermal blanket and a fresh bottle of formula tucked inside. The thicket called to him, a magnetic pull through the gathering dark. He moved quietly, flashlight beam cutting swaths through the underbrush, the beam dancing over ferns and roots. She was there, curled in the hollow, but not asleep. Her eyes snapped open at his approach, a low huff of recognition escaping her. Relief washed over him, chased by a sharper pang. She'd waited, unmoving, as if the world beyond held no appeal without him. Jack knelt, offering the bottle, and she latched on with desperate hunger, her body relaxing against his knee. "Missed me, did you?" he whispered, the words catching in his throat. But as the stars emerged overhead, pricking the velvet sky, a new sound intruded. A vehicle's engine, growling closer on the service road. Headlights swept the tree line, tires crunching gravel. Jack's blood ran cold. It was the wildlife team's Jeep, Elena and Tom, no doubt following up on hunches. He scooped the cub up, blanket and all, and bolted deeper into the woods, branches whipping his face, the cub's weight a warm anchor in his arms. The engine idled, doors slamming, voices calling into the night. "Harlan, that you out there?" He didn't answer, weaving through the trees toward a ravine he'd scouted years ago, its steep walls offering cover. The chase was on, not just for the cub, but for the man he'd become in her shadow, defiant, alive in a way the trails alone could never make him. The river's distant roar mocked him, a symphony of what couldn't be outrun. Jack's lungs burned as he plunged deeper into the ravine, the cub's muffled whimpers vibrating against his chest like a frantic heartbeat. Branches clawed at his arms, snagging his jacket and drawing thin lines of blood across his skin. But he didn't slow. The flashlight beam bounced wildly ahead, illuminating twisted roots and slick moss that threatened to send him sprawling. Behind him, the voices of Elena and Tom echoed through the trees, sharp with urgency, their beams slicing the night like searchlights. "Jack, we know you're out here. Stop running, and let's talk this through." Elena's call carried the weight of authority, laced with the concern of an old friend who knew his stubborn streak all too well. He ducked under a low overhang of granite, the ravine's walls closing in like the jaws of some ancient beast. The air down here was cooler, damp with the mineral tang of underground springs, and the river's roar grew louder, a thunderous undercurrent that drowned out the footsteps pursuing him. Jack pressed his back against the cold rock, sliding to a crouch, the cub squirming in his arms as if sensing the peril. Her nose poked out from the blanket, sniffing the unfamiliar shadows, and he shushed her gently, one hand stroking her flank. "Easy, girl. We're okay. Just gotta think this through." But his mind was a storm of its own. Flashes of protocol violations, suspension notices, the cub's future hanging by a thread because of his choices. The beams swept closer, Tom's voice joining in. "Ranger Harlan, if you've got the cub, bring her out now. She's not safe like this. Could draw in a male bear or worse." Jack's jaw clenched. They weren't wrong. The night woods teemed with unseen eyes, coyotes yipping in the distance, the occasional snap of a twig that could be anything from a deer to a prowling grizzly. He'd crossed too many lines already, turning a routine patrol into this clandestine flight, but abandoning her now, after the miles she'd followed, the river they'd conquered together. It felt like betrayal, an echo of Sarah's parting words about his inability to commit. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the lights probed the tree line above, voices fading then sharpening with each pass. Jack waited, breath shallow, until the engine revved and the Jeep pulled away, tires grinding gravel in retreat. False hope? Or had they bought the bluff of his absence? He eased out, the cub's weight a comforting anchor as he climbed a faint animal path up the opposite bank. The ravine spit them out onto a narrow ledge overlooking the fire hole, its waters a black ribbon under the moon, frothing white where it met boulders. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the drama below, and Jack paused to catch his breath, the night's chill seeping through his sweat-damp clothes. He needed a plan. Real, not this patchwork of evasion. The park's rehab center in Mammoth was equipped for cases like this. Incubators, monitoring cams, a team of experts who could assess if the cub could be paired with a foster mother or prepped for release. But imprinting complicated everything. She'd bonded to him, a human scent marking her as other. Elena had seen it before, bears that couldn't hunt alone, ending up roadkill or euthanized when rehab failed. Jack's stomach twisted at the thought. He couldn't let that happen. Maybe a quiet handover, off the books, where he could plead her case personally, or take her to his cabin on the outskirts, just for a night, to buy time. The cub stirred, letting out a needy huff, and he unwrapped the blanket enough to check her. She was warmer now, eyes bright in the moonlight, but her ribs pressed against his palm, a stark reminder of her fragility. He offered the last of the formula, holding the bottle steady as she nursed, her paws kneading rhythmically. The simple act grounded him, the river's murmur a soothing counterpoint. "You're tougher than you look," he whispered, watching her eyelids droop. In the quiet, memories surfaced. His father's stories of Wyoming winters, tracking bears in the snow, teaching respect for the wild's unyielding code. Never interfere, Dad had said, but Jack had always questioned it, seeing the gray and black and white rules. Dawn was hours away, but the night felt endless. Jack shouldered on, paralleling the river upstream toward a forgotten ranger outpost, a weathered shack used for gear storage during off-seasons, miles from any trail. The path was treacherous, overgrown with thistles that tugged at his legs, but the cub stayed put in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder in exhausted trust. Owls hooted from the branches, their calls ghostly in the dark, and once, a rustle in the brush made him freeze, spray at the ready. Nothing emerged, just the wind playing tricks. By the time the shack loomed into view, a squat silhouette against the starry sky, Jack's arms ached, his steps heavy with fatigue. He jimmied the rusted lock with a stick, the door creaking open on hinges that protested like old bones. Inside, the air was musty. Shelves lined with dusty flares and first aid kits. A cot in the corner sagging under cobwebs. He spread the blanket on the floor, settling the cub there with a pile of dried berries from his pack. She curled up immediately, nose tucked under her paw, the picture of vulnerability. Jack sank onto the cot, rubbing his eyes, the weight of the day crashing down. His radio lay silent on the shelf. No signal here, another isolation. He pulled out his phone, spotty bars but enough to text a park buddy, Mike, who owed him favors from a storm rescue last year. Need discreet advice? Got a situation with wildlife. Meet at East Overlook tomorrow. The reply pinged back quick. Trouble? On my way at first light. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sleep came in fits. The cub's soft snores a lullaby against the river's distant song. Dreams tangled, Sarah's face blurring with the cub's, rivers swelling to swallow them both. He woke to gray pre-dawn light filtering through cracked windows, the cub stirring with a yawn. She nosed his hand, demanding attention, and he obliged, sharing a strip of jerky that she gummed enthusiastically. The shack felt like a temporary haven, but dawn brought clarity. He couldn't hide forever. Elena would mobilize the full team, helicopters if needed, and the park's vastness had limits. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the walls in soft gold, Jack heard the faint crunch of tires on the access road. His pulse spiked. Mike, or the team? He peered out a grimy window, spotting a familiar pickup, dust kicking up behind. Relief mixed with dread, another layer to the deception. The cub watched him, oblivious, as he stepped out to meet whatever came next. The river flowed on below, a relentless witness to choices that rippled outward, testing the bonds of man, beast, and the wild heart of Yellowstone. Mike's pickup rattled to a stop outside the shack, its engine coughing into silence like an old man settling into a chair. Jack stepped out from the shadowed doorway, the morning light catching the stubble on his jaw and the deep lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. The cub peered from behind his legs, her small head tilting curiously at the newcomer, but she didn't bolt. Her trust in Jack had woven a fragile safety net around the unfamiliar. Mike climbed out, a stocky ranger in his late 30s with a beard like tangled underbrush and eyes that had seen too many close calls in the park's unforgiving folds. They'd shared shifts and secrets over campfires, Mike the one who'd pulled Jack from a snowbound patrol after his divorce, when the mountains had started to feel like both refuge and cage. Jack, what the hell? Mike kept his voice low, glancing over his shoulder at the empty access road. The sun climbed higher, gilding the pines in amber, but the air held the crisp bite of impending autumn, carrying the faint, sulphurous whisper from distant geysers. Your text was cryptic as a bad weather report. Elena's on the warpath, says you've gone rogue over some cub. Spill it. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture pulling at scabs from the night's branches. He led Mike inside, the shack's door groaning shut behind them. The cub emerged fully now, padding forward with a tentative huff, her black fur absorbing the light like velvet. Mike's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. Years in wildlife ops had toughened him to surprises. This the one? Damn, she's a scrapper. Looks like she's claimed you as her personal escort. Jack nodded, sinking onto the cot's edge, the springs creaking under his weight. The cub nosed at Mike's boot, then retreated to Jack's side, her body language a clear declaration. Followed me for miles yesterday, right into that river mess. Pulled her out and she won't let go. Imprinted hard. Elena wants her in rehab, but I know how that goes. Tests, quarantine. Then if she doesn't adjust, it's a one-way ticket to a cage or worse. His voice cracked on the last word, raw with the vulnerability he'd buried under ranger stoicism. The divorce had taught him loss, but this felt sharper. A paternal ache for a creature who'd chosen him in her desperation. Mike crouched, extending a gloved hand for the cub to sniff. She did briefly, then ignored him, curling against Jack's knee instead. You're in deep, brother. Protocol's black and white for a reason. Humans mess with wild ones. It ends bad for everybody. Remember that grizzly last year? Hand-fed by campers, turned aggressive, had to be put down. He straightened, crossing his arms, his flannel shirt straining over broad shoulders. But I get it. Park life's lonely as hell. After my knee blew out on that cliff rescue, I almost quit. This job, it gives back what it takes, if you're paying attention. The cub let out a soft whine, pawing at Jack's hand for attention, and he obliged, scratching her ears until her eyes half closed in contentment. Outside, the river's murmur rose with the breeze, a steady reminder of the crossing that had sealed their fates. Jack's mind raced, visions of Elena's team sweeping the trails, hikers posting blurry photos online, the cub's future unraveling like a poorly tied knot. I can't just hand her over. She survived poachers or whatever took her mom, wandered God knows how far. If I could get her to a surrogate sow, somewhere quiet. Mike paced the cramped space, boots thudding on the warped floorboards. Dust motes danced in the sunlight slanting through the window, illuminating cobwebs like forgotten dreams. There's a contact, old-timer vet up in the Absaroka Range. Retired from the service, handles off-books rehabs for cases like this. No guarantees, but he's got a setup. Enclosed pen with a foster bear, teaches him wild ways without the full imprint wipeout. Risky, though. If Elena finds out, we're both toast. Suspension, maybe worse. Jack's pulse quickened, hope flickering like the embers of last night's fire. It wasn't clean, but it was a path, one that honored the bond without dooming her to captivity. The cub watched them, oblivious to the stakes, her tail twitching as she chewed on a stray twig. How do we pull it off? Team's probably combing the ridges by now. Mike pulled a crumpled map from his pocket, spreading it on a dusty shelf. His finger traced a dotted line snaking east from the shack, skirting the main roads toward the park's boundary. My shift ends at noon. We load her in the truck bed, under tarps, say it's gear, drive out the northeast entrance, link up with the vet at his cabin off Highway 89. I'll cover for you. Say you called in sick, stomach bug from bad trail mix. He grinned faintly, but his eyes were serious, the weight of brotherhood in the offer. Tension coiled in Jack's chest, a dramatic knot of revelation and conflict. This wasn't just evasion, it was defiance, a turning point where duty clashed with the raw pull of empathy. He thought of the empty Bozeman apartment, the nights staring at the ceiling while the park's calls echoed in his dreams. The cub had followed him into the unknown, and now he owed her the same. All right. Let's do it. They moved quickly, the morning ticking toward midday. Mike fetched a ventilated crate from his truck, lining it with the thermal blanket and padding it with pine boughs to muffle scents. Jack coaxed the cub inside with a trail of berries, her protests fading to curious sniffs as the door latched. The drive was a nail-biter. Park roads winding through meadows where bison grazed like ancient sentinels, oblivious to the hidden cargo bouncing in the bed. Jack rode shotgun, radio off, heart in his throat at every ranger vehicle they passed. Elena's voice crackled faintly from Mike's dash unit once, a routine check-in, but Mike deflected smoothly. All quiet here. Harlan's under the weather, told him to rest up. Hours blurred into a tense vigil, the Absaroka foothills rising like jagged teeth on the horizon. They crossed into the vet's land at dusk, the cabin a weathered log haven tucked against a creek, smoke curling from its chimney. Dr. Harlan, coincidentally sharing Jack's last name, a wry twist, greeted them at the gate. A grizzled man in his 70s with hands scarred from decades of surgeries. He examined the cub under the cabin's porch light, her eyes wide but unafraid as he checked her vitals. Strong little fighter. Imprints there, but not irreversible. My sow's got cubs her age. She'll take to her in time. Fenced woods, no humans after this. Release in spring if she adapts. Jack knelt by the crate one last time, the cub's paw reaching through the bars to touch his fingers. Tears pricked his eyes, unbidden, the emotional arc cresting in a wave of bittersweet release. You did good, girl. Go be wild. She huffed, as if understanding, and he latched the gate, stepping back as the vet carried her into the shadowed enclosure. The sow's low rumble greeted her. Curious rather than hostile, A new chapter unfolding in the moonlit woods. Mike clapped Jack's shoulder as they drove away, the park's lights fading in the rear view. "You saved her, man. And maybe yourself." Jack nodded, the road ahead stretching into the night, the river's echo a distant memory. For the first time in years, the mountains felt less like a solitude and more like a promise of redemption, unlikely bonds, and the quiet justice of letting go. Back in Bozeman days later, Jack resumed patrols with a cleared conscience, the cub's fate a guarded secret shared only with Mike. Elena eyed him suspiciously during briefings, but the trail went cold, no sightings, no reports, and life in Yellowstone churned on, its rhythms unbroken. Jack found small changes. A photo of the Absarokas on his dash, a softer edge to his solitary evenings. The wild had given him a gift, wrapped in fur and whimpers, teaching that some crossings led not to loss, but to the heart's quiet healing. Leave a comment sharing what you thought about this story.